We start this Monday night with Iowa's future in the presidential primary and caucus process. Iowa has been first in the nation for half a century, but in the aftermath of reporting issues in 2020, that status is up in the air for 2024. Tonight, Iowa's News Now State House reporter Skylar Talal is looking at the issues and the fight for Iowa's position in this special report.
Questions started to rise after Iowa caucus officials waited a week before releasing official results on who won the 2020 Iowa Democratic Caucus. Why did this happen? How do we avoid this in the future? And why is Iowa first in the nation?
There's no kind of magic reason why Iowa ever became first in the nation. It's kind of a quirk of history.
Iowa has held on to its first in the nation status since 1972, when Jimmy Carter's Iowa caucus win propelled him to the White House. But many question what qualifications a state needs to be first. Rachel Payne Caulfield, a political science professor at Drake, explains the ideal political climate.
A wide range of candidates would be able to compete effectively and successfully, where voters would be engaged, with high levels of political knowledge, where you have activists spread out across the state who are capable of really working with the campaigns and shepherding them through the process, and where you have a media market that doesn't cost a fortune.
Iowa leaders say Iowa is still the perfect place for candidates to introduce themselves to voters. The 2020 Democratic Caucus raised concerns after results weren't in on caucus night.
There are some folks who are not happy with what happened here in 2020. And, we're going to have to defend our place in the process.
Iowa State political science professor Karen Kudrowski says defending Iowa being first is not new, with this debate coming up every 4 years.
They have, appealed to tradition. They have appealed to, the voter participation.
Even so, the Democratic National Committee is not only questioning Iowa's place, but the process as a whole. A new proposal would require states wanting to hold their contest before the first Tuesday in March to fill out a new waiver. The DNC outlines a set of guidelines it would base its decision on.
Is looking to diversify the range of candidates who can compete, is looking to engage a wide group of Democratic supporters across the country, and is looking to select candidates that can compete nationwide.
Based on the proposal, the DNC would grant up to 5 states permission to be a part of the process. Scott Brennan, who sits on the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee, says as of now, this is just a proposal.
And it's clear, based upon the last several presidential cycles, that in order to elect a Democratic president, you have to have a successful Midwestern strategy.
Iowa GOP Chair Jeff Kaufman says Republicans aren't looking to change up their process. He's now working alongside the Iowa Democratic Party to keep Iowa first.
And I think what the Democrats are going to find, the national Democrats are going to find, is that sometimes the perceived solution is actually going to be worse than what they perceive as the problem.
If Iowa is stripped from its first in the nation status, Kudrowski says it would be a huge loss not only for the Hawkeye State, but for all Midwestern states.
It is good for Iowa and the Midwest to be among the first. Whether or not it needs to be the absolute first contest, I think, is less important than being part of the early conversation.
While the schedule is up in the air, it will be finalized this summer, meaning we will know soon if Iowa stays first or if 50 years of political tradition is upended. In Des Moines, Skylar Talal reporting. Iowa Democrats are having to reapply and make their case to the Democratic National Party as to why the Iowa caucuses should remain first in the nation. Along with possibly losing national attention every 4 years, Iowa businesses could take a hit financially as well.
It's not just a week or a month or 2 months. It truly is a full year of entertaining people, having them stay in our hotels in the state, and really having them promote and see what we're all about from a tourism and hospitality perspective.
Catch Des Moines, Iowa estimates Iowa's capital city brought in $11 million of revenue in just the week leading up to the 2020 caucuses. Mike Draper is the founder of Raygun, an Iowa-based company who will feel the impact.
In-store revenue will probably, leading up to the caucuses, be, 30% higher than it would be in a non-caucus year.
Since the caucuses in 2008, Draper's been connecting with businesses who come to town, including National Public Radio and American Public Media. Now he's providing merchandise for the White House Association Correspondent Dinner, an opportunity he says wouldn't be possible without the Iowa caucuses.
it might surprise a lot of people that so many media companies would be using a print shop based out of Des Moines, Iowa, but all of that comes, solely out of meeting people over the years during the caucuses.
Dunker says businesses in Iowa are already struggling after COVID hit them with a 25% loss in revenue. And she says any opportunity for a slight revenue increase will help.
Our restaurant's going to close directly because we lose the first in the nation status of the caucuses. No, but might it be a contributing factor on top of a number of other factors that would lead to businesses choosing to stop operating? Yes.
In Des Moines, Skylar Tlaw reporting. Iowa Democrats say they'll adjust their caucus process if they're chosen to be one of the 4 states in the 2024 presidential nominating process.
We indicate in the letter that we are willing to make significant procedural changes as well as expand ways to participate.
In that letter Wednesday, Iowa Democrats promised to make the caucuses more accessible and straightforward. Caucuses are more complex and harder to attend than primary elections that most states use. Scott Brennan, the representative for Iowa who sits on the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee, threw out some ideas.
Maybe there's no longer realignment. The 15% threshold, could be a question that we need to discuss. There was a non-present participation aspect, and maybe that's something we can resurrect.
Iowa Democrats say they are still looking at different options and everything is on the table. Even though the letter has limited details, they point out they'd like to see the current process stay the same, including the first 4 states remaining in their roles, with Iowa again grabbing national spotlight come February 2024. Party Chair Ross Wilburn gave a sneak peek into what their argument will be to keep Iowa first.
And the nation has followed when we said that a black man, Barack Obama, could be and should be president of the United States. We led Iowa in saying that love is love, and who you choose to marry, start a family with, is up to you. The rest of the country followed, and going back to decades before Brown versus Board of Education. Iowa said that schools will, be integrated. That happened first here in Iowa. The rest of the country followed.
This is just the first step. The party still needs to submit a formal application. From there, only a certain number of states will be picked to present their case in front of the committee in June. In Des Moines, Skylar Tlaw reporting. 3 Iowa Democrats, Party Chair Ross Wilburn, State House Minority Leader Jennifer Confirst, and the Iowa rep on the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee, Scott Brennan, were in Washington, D.C. this morning, pitching to the DNC why Iowa should remain first in the 2024 presidential nominating process. Now, they only had 15 minutes to cover 3 categories: diversity, competitiveness, and feasibility. They also shared a video from Democratic leaders across the state on why the caucuses were important to them. In the 20 minutes that followed the presentation, DNC members questioned the Iowa reps on a number of different issues, one of those being Iowa's competitiveness.
The Democratic Party is still organized, inspired, and enthused, and our registration is still a third. We've been doing a lot of really collective, collaborative research in the state of Iowa on voters to make sure that we can start to make gains here. Can I promise you we're going to get there in 2022? Nope. But I can promise you that we're going to make huge strides in 24 that will truly be reflective of how Iowa is a purple state.
After the presentation, Confirst and Wilburn spoke with reporters and were confident in their pitch. Iowa is up against 15 other states and 1 U.S. territory, but said they're more focused on keeping Iowa first than what the others are pitching to the DNC. And coming up on Iowa's News Now at 5, I'll dive deeper into their pitch and cover any concerns raised by the DNC. Live in Des Moines, Skylar Tlaw, Iowa's News Now.
We didn't come here to run for second place. We came here to be first and to stay first.
After months of preparation, Iowa Democrats finally present to the DNC why Iowa should remain first in the nation with the Iowa caucuses. They were only given 15 minutes to plead their case, but the 3 Iowa reps say they're confident in their pitch. Iowa Dems highlighted the Des Moines Public School District when they focused on the 3 main categories, including diversity.
The demographic breakdown was 34.7% white, 29.2% Hispanic, 20.6% African American.
Competitiveness.
Voter registration remains divided. A third Democrats, a third Republicans, a third no party.
and feasibility.
He is proposing to implement a process for the expression of presidential preference that would be conducted by non-present participation by mail.
The 20 minutes following the presentation were filled with questions from members of the Rules and Bylaws Committee. While some were concerned the proposed changes to the caucus process were too similar to a primary,
We are focused on complying with our state law, which mandates that we are a caucus, and we believe that what we have proposed meets the requirements of Iowa Code Section 43.4.
others focus on how changes may impact diverse participation.
It's our expectation that by expanding access to the caucuses, that will increase the diversity of people who can participate, since those are often the ones who are not reflected in the current process.
The Rules and Bylaws Committee will vote in August before sending their recommendation before the DNC to be voted upon in September.
Other states are making the cases, but no one can make the case that they've been doing first in the nation caucuses for decades.
In Des Moines, Skylar Twell reporting.
Iowa Democrats and their national committee continue their push to keep Iowa first in the nation when it comes to the presidential nominating process. Iowa's News Now State House reporter Skylar Twell follows that fight ahead of 2024.
It's still unclear where DNC members stand on who will lead the 2024 presidential nominating calendar. But Iowa's Representative Scott Brennan, who sits on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, says one thing he is expecting is change.
We've invested so much time and energy, and we had all these states apply, and now we're going to have to do something. And what that looks like, I don't think anyone knows yet.
In a meeting over the weekend, some made it clear they don't want to base their decision on tradition, but instead be creative in their selection process. Others pushed back, hoping committee members won't mix things up just for the sake of change.
If we walk out of that meeting and we have the exact 4 states in the same order, I think people will lose their minds.
On top of the committee's opinion, Brennan says there's still one more person they're waiting to hear from, the president.
Ultimately, we assume the White House is going to weigh in at some point and tell us this is what works for us. And then we have to decide, how much weight that opinion has. But they've not given us that opinion yet.
The committee has sent out additional questions for each state to complete by Friday. They'll be meeting again in August to put together their recommendation before it goes to the full DNC for a vote. In Des Moines, Skylar Twell reporting. The DNC's plans to restructure the 2024 presidential nominating calendar is expected to take place in early December. They delayed it back in July until after the midterms.
I think they decided, the races were going to be close, as they obviously were, because a number of still aren't decided. And so they decided that we would move it back to early December so that it would not play in those races at all.
Waiting until after the midterms has presented another opportunity for the DNC to see which states are competitive, something they're weighing when making their decision. And the red wave Iowa saw on election night could be the nail in the coffin for Iowa Democrats.
It wasn't the best thing for Iowa Democrats on every level, but it'll be an additional hurdle that I think we'll have to overcome as we make our pitch.
Statewide, only one Democrat appears to have won, but others were close. Scott Brennan, Iowa's DNC representative who sits on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, believes national attention could be just what Iowa Democrats need.
Money moved out of Iowa late and actually probably cost us at least one, if not more, congressional seats. And so if you take a hard look at the numbers, I think you can see that there are still real good battles that can be fought here.
Iowa Democratic leaders hope to be in the first 4, but ultimately want to keep their first in the nation status. But experts say, based on midterm results across the country, Iowa's not the most competitive state.
The DNC could look at it and say, well, Iowa wasn't as competitive as we would like, and therefore, or maybe we'll back them up somewhere in the process, not first, but maybe, who knows, second, third, something like that.
And if Iowa Democrats don't receive an early spot altogether, it could push Iowa to become an even deeper red state. Republicans have already committed to keeping the Iowa caucuses first in 2024.
It's possible that you'll have more voters that will switch to Republican and stay there, just because Democrats aren't making their case as strongly in Iowa.
In Des Moines, Skylar Twell reporting. With the midterms in the rearview mirror, Iowa Republicans and Democrats gear up for the 2024 election cycle.
The midterm elections being behind us means that we're all looking at 2024.
The Iowa GOP is looking ahead to the Iowa caucuses after the National Party decided to keep Iowa first on the Republican side.
I think we're going to have an energetic caucus season. I think there's going to be multiple people that are going to take a crack at it. How long that they remain in the race, I think, is simply a reflection of their competitiveness.
For Iowa Democrats, their first in the nation status hangs in the balance as the DNC looks to change up the 2024 presidential nominating calendar, and we're expected to know by early next month.
If that decision is made and Iowa is still an early state, that provides a lot of opportunities for national investment and national profile. But regardless, we're here to fight.
Either way, it's full speed ahead for both parties.
My candidacy for President of the United States.
After Donald Trump declares his 2024 presidential run.
I look at that as essentially the beginning of our caucus season. We got a lot of mini dramas. Who's in, who's not, who stays in once they're in.
Even with their poor midterm results, Iowa Democrats say this is just the latest in the ongoing fight to push back against the corporate greed that now funds the Iowa GOP.
What we're going to do between now and 2024 is no different than what we did before the midterm elections. We're going to keep listening to Iowans, hearing what their priorities are and fighting for those priorities.
Priorities like public education, reproductive freedom, and lower costs. Iowa GOP Chair Jeff Kaufman says if the economy continues in its current state, Republicans will continue to focus on inflation along with other issues like border security. Going forward, Iowans can expect visits from candidates, which both parties are ready to welcome to the state.
Iowans can continue to expect that they're going to see our state on the national news. I mean, we start out this whole wonderful experience.
In Des Moines, Skylar Tlaw reporting.
No, it wasn't surprising that Iowa was removed, or at least the DNC is trying to remove Iowa from the first in the nation status.
The DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee is recommending Iowa be booted as one of the early states to kick off the 2024 presidential nominating process. Under the committee's plan, South Carolina will replace Iowa, followed by New Hampshire, Nevada, Georgia, and Michigan.
The fact that the Democrats had difficulties for 2 caucuses in a row in terms of getting the results out quickly. And that's one of the important things about the caucuses.
And with Iowa Democrats potentially out of the early nominating process, Iowa's economy may see millions of dollars redirected to other states. Catch Des Moines predicted Iowa would generate $11.3 million in the week leading up to the 2020 Iowa caucuses.
Definitely put a strain on our economy and our GDP for this state during that time period. It also adds hours of extra employment during a slower time period.
And the political impact could be detrimental for Democrats competing for independent voters in Iowa.
If the Democrats pull out their caucuses, and if that actually hurts the Republican caucus as well, that those folks may never swing back to the Democrats, and Democrats have lost Iowa for a very long time potentially.
Iowa Democrats are worried Republicans will have an even bigger advantage than they already do now across the state.
The fact that Republicans continued to get to have that organization and fundraising and we wouldn't is one of the reasons we think it's important to continue to follow our state law.
No matter what, Republicans will be keeping Iowa first in 2024, but as changes are made for Democrats, it could put pressure on Republicans as well.
If you move up states like Georgia and Michigan, which are both 3 times the size of Iowa, that means that any Republican candidates would have to spend more time in those states to make sure they do well in those primaries, rather than spending their time in Iowa.
The DNC still has to formally approve the changes, with a vote expected early next year. But Iowa Democrats have already said they plan to follow state law, which requires them to hold their caucus first. In Des Moines, Skylar Tlaw reporting.
Iowa Republicans are pushing back on the decision to take Iowa out of its first in the nation spot on the Democratic side in 2024. It's not so much about what it means for Democrats, but for the GOP themselves. GOP chair in the state, Jeff Kaufman, says it's a political move by President Biden to make sure he wins the first primary, which sounds like it'd be in South Carolina in 2024. Even though Republicans are keeping Iowa first in the nation on their side, the move could ultimately hurt them, even though it's on the Democratic side. GOP candidates now might not visit Iowa as much as they're following the rest of the caucus calendar. Kaufman, though, says he is not worried.
I don't think our legislature is going to have an appetite for them to change because of what the DNC stated. Yeah, maybe there might have been a cooperation before, but after they did this, I don't think Iowa legislators could care less. Actually, I'll be honest, Skylar, I don't think most Democratic legislators in the state have an appetite to change that state law.
And this is why that state law says Iowa Democrats have to hold their caucus first, and so they say that is what they are planning to do. The full DNC also still needs to officially vote on Iowa moving back. That vote will probably come sometime early next year.